Faced with a long-awaited opening, an atmosphere of reverence hung over the millennia-old scene. A few meters from the ancient center of Jerusalem, under the structure of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, a select group of experts, including renowned archaeologists, scientists, and religious representatives, watched in absolute silence. There, in front of them, lay a tomb that had been sealed for over 20 centuries. No sound, apart from the slight scraping of tools on the rock, interrupted the moment full of expectation. Tension could be felt in the air. What awaited behind that stone barrier could change not only history, but also the spiritual understanding of millions. With calculated movements, the excavation work began. Centuries of dust, fragments, and small debris were removed with extreme care. Each layer removed revealed a little more of the internal structure. This wasn't just an archaeological exercise. It was as if each gesture brought to light not only physical traces, but echoes of events that shaped the basis of one of humanity's greatest beliefs. The site, more than historical, was sacred to countless people around the world. Access to the burial chamber was finally granted. The silence at that moment was almost ritualistic. The interior of the tomb was surprisingly preserved, as if it had been untouched, protected by an invisible force over the centuries. For the scholars present, it was an archaeological treasure. For the faithful, it was a tangible sign of something divine. In front of them, the place that tradition points to as the place where Jesus of Nazareth was buried after his crucifixion. Ancient accounts, especially those contained in the Gospels, mention that after Jesus' death, an influential disciple called Joseph of Arimathea took it upon himself to remove his body from the cross. He wrapped it in pure linen, prepared it with spices, and laid it in a tomb dug into the rock, a common practice among the Jews of that time. The tomb was then sealed with a large stone, and Roman soldiers were stationed at the entrance to prevent any kind of breach. However, 3 days later, something extraordinary was reported. According to the biblical texts, a group of women, including Mary Magdalene, returned to the site at dawn. When they arrived, they noticed that the stone had been removed and Jesus' body was no longer there. A shining being, described as an angel, told them that he had risen. This scene, with the empty tomb in the background, became a central symbol of the Christian faith, representing not only victory over death, but also the promise of life that never ends. Now, centuries later, the rediscovery of this site was reviving the collective imagination. Every detail of the tomb was being examined with extreme attention. Marks carved into the stone, remnants of burial rituals, and even the structure of the slab where, according to tradition, the body would have rested, were there, accessible for the first time in ages. The state of preservation of the stone was something that drew special attention. Despite the passage of time, it maintained a solidity that defied the effects of natural erosion. When contemplating this event, it's impossible not to feel the weight of time and history echoing through the stones that have kept this secret for centuries. But what if there was something even deeper behind this revelation? Something that has been carefully concealed over the centuries? In the forbidden name of Jesus, you'll find answers that have never been fully revealed. A rare insight that could transform your view of faith and the divine. And the best part, it's at your fingertips now. Don't let this opportunity pass you by. Access is in the first comment box. The experience was impactful from all perspectives. Scientists sought to understand the material conditions, while scriptural scholars analyzed possible connections between the site and the biblical accounts. Religious leaders, meanwhile, saw the find as an opportunity to strengthen the link between the faith they had professed for centuries and the tangible evidence of history. There was no direct dispute between reason and belief at that moment. Rather, there was a silent encounter between two ways of interpreting the world, both guided by a genuine desire for understanding. As the excavations progressed, evidence of funeral practices consistent with the context of the Second Temple began to emerge. The very architectural style of the chamber, the way the bodies were deposited, and the types of materials found there reinforced the hypothesis that this could indeed be the tomb of an extremely important figure from that period. The discovery was not just physical, it brought with it a call to contemplation. For some, a renewal of faith, for others, a historical milestone. For everyone present, a vivid reminder that certain stories don't die with time. They just wait for the right moment to be seen in the light again. What lay inside that tomb went beyond any archaeological find. They were not just fragments from a remote era, but the symbolic materialization of a moment that divided history. There, in the silence filled with meaning, lay something that transcended time. A testimony of faith, a milestone between human frailty and the promise of eternity. Each stone, each detail preserved in that place seemed to echo a truth that had withstood the passage of centuries. The idea that life did not end with death, but was renewed by something greater. While the scholars organized the first records and analyses, a collective consciousness formed around the discovery. It wasn't just a historical relic. That space resonated with the memory of an event that, although distant, still pulsed in the hearts of millions. The story of Jesus was alive, not as a memory frozen in time, but as a constant presence, renewed with each generation that seeks to understand what actually happened there. The tomb became, more than ever, a starting point, not an end. In this scenario of contemplation and discovery, two elements emerge even more clearly: faith, which moves mountains even without tangible proof, and salvation, which promises a new beginning. These are the pillars on which Jesus' central message rests. Understanding its depth requires more than historical knowledge. It requires openness of soul. Faith, in this context, is not simply believing in something distant or improbable. It is a profound adherence to what, although invisible, is felt to be undeniable. Millions connect with this story without ever having set foot on that soil, without ever having seen that tomb. What moves them is this intimate conviction that a divine promise has been fulfilled there, victory over death. The empty tomb then becomes a powerful symbol, not of absence, but of a transforming presence. The scriptures reinforce this idea that believing without seeing is a high virtue. The resurrection, lacking direct scientific proof, represents the greatest challenge and at the same time the greatest invitation to faith. The empty tomb is, paradoxically, the strongest evidence of something that cannot be measured with instruments, but which shapes entire lives. The fact that there is no body for the faithful is not a gap to be explained. It is the confirmation of a promise fulfilled. With this comes the second great foundation: salvation. Jesus' death on the cross was not a tragic end, but the beginning of a greater plan. In his surrender, according to the sacred texts, he took on the weight of all guilt, of all errors, opening the way for a definitive reconciliation between the divine and the human. With his resurrection, this path was sealed, not just as a theological theory, but as a living offering to all who would accept it. Before this event, religious rituals involved continuous sacrifices as a form of spiritual purification. Jesus, by offering himself voluntarily, ends this cycle and inaugurates a new reality. It is no longer human effort that defines salvation, but the grace granted. For many, this new condition represents an unprecedented turning point in the way their relationship with the divine is perceived. It's no longer necessary to carry ancestral burdens or follow purification rituals. It is enough to believe and accept. When the stone was removed from the entrance to the tomb, something invisible was also moved inside each person who believes in this story. The barrier that separated man from the eternal was broken. This break is remembered year after year, especially during the celebration of Easter, when the resurrection is honored as a sign of renewed hope. It is a constant reminder that life, in its deepest essence, does not end with death. However, believing in this promise is not automatic. Faith requires surrender, persistence in the face of doubt, and resilience in the storms of life. And it's not always easy. Doubts arise, questions are inevitable. Even those closest to Jesus hesitated. One of his disciples, on hearing about his return to life, refused to accept it without first touching the wounds, feeling them with his own hands. When he finally did, he understood that faith is not built only with the eyes, but with the soul. This experience, lived 2,000 years ago, is still being repeated. The journey of faith is not linear but personal, and each person who contemplates the story of the empty tomb is challenged to decide what it means, a simple archaeological coincidence or an invitation to inner transformation. The link between believing and being saved is what underpins the basis of Christianity. There is no separating one from the other. Faith in the resurrection is what allows Christians to see salvation as something real and tangible, even if it is invisible to the eye. The conviction that death did not end Jesus' journey is the same conviction that nourishes the hope that life does not end with the last breath. It is this certainty that renews strength in times of pain and confusion, offering guidance when all seems lost. Trust in this historical spiritual event goes beyond a simple belief. It becomes a lens through which the faithful interpret their own existence. The tomb, which in any other context would be the end of a journey, comes to be understood as a point of new beginnings, a constant reminder that even the darkest moments can be transformed into portals to something greater. In the Christian vision, faith is the engine that drives this transformation. That's why the resurrection is not treated as an isolated episode, but as a symbol of shared victory. By conquering death, Jesus not only rewrote his own destiny, but opened up a new path for all those who believe in him. Salvation, then, is not presented as a privilege for the few, but as a promise accessible to anyone willing to trust. And it is precisely this promise that many use as an anchor amid the chaos of everyday life, guiding decisions, strengthening convictions, and rekindling purpose. The recent reopening of Jesus' tomb only reinforces the ongoing impact of this story. It has not only brought new discoveries, but has rekindled an ancient feeling that has survived the centuries. Jerusalem, already known for its layers of overlapping stories, has once again become the center of a quest that unites intellect and spirit. The city, which has witnessed so many transformations over time, holds in its heart the episode that redefined the understanding of life, death, and what lies beyond. Historically, the context in which Jesus lived and died was extremely troubled. Roman domination, political instability, a multiplicity of religious doctrines and messianic expectations created a tense scenario. Crucifixion, in turn, was a public and humiliating form of punishment, designed to discourage any attempt at subversion. Jesus was executed in this environment of conflict, but according to the accounts, his death had a meaning that went far beyond the punishment imposed by Rome. The Gospels describe each step of his condemnation in detail, revealing not only the physical suffering, but also the spiritual meaning attributed to each moment. Earlier Jewish scriptures, such as the book of Isaiah, already spoke of someone who would bear the sorrows of many. The identification of this suffering servant with the figure of Jesus is a fundamental key in Christian theology. The alignment between these prophecies and the New Testament accounts reinforces for believers the authenticity and purpose of everything that happened. Furthermore, the Bible is not only seen as a holy book. For many, it also functions as a historical record full of clues about the culture, practices, and events of the time. Numerous archaeological finds have confirmed the veracity of places, characters, and customs mentioned in the scriptures. This convergence between faith and historical evidence makes the investigation of the tomb even more significant, as it can offer both spiritual and scientific insights. The study of artifacts and structures from that period has been essential in putting together a more accurate picture of what really happened. Elements such as the type of rock, the architecture of the tomb, and the objects found help to paint a clearer picture of the context in which Jesus was buried. This information, far from discrediting the sacred texts, often strengthens them, showing that there is consistency between the biblical account and the archaeological data. Despite this, the resurrection remains a question that goes beyond any physical proof. No fossil, no laboratory analysis can validate or refute an event whose nature is, by definition, supernatural. The essence of the Christian faith lies precisely there, in trusting without having to see. And for those who believe, this gesture of trust is the deepest expression of the love they have received, a love that doesn't require proof, but is revealed in the silence of the heart that chooses to believe. Inside that ancient tomb, what was revealed to the world was not just a piece of historical evidence, but something much deeper. Between the fragments of stone and the atmosphere filled with silence lay a lasting sign of an event that has echoed for more than 2 millennia. An event that has not been lost over time, but has remained burning like a living flame, reminding humanity that in that silent chamber there was an instant of encounter between the divine and the human, a milestone where the eternal touched the temporal. As the years go by and studies on that place continue, one truth is reaffirmed: there will always be more to understand. The mystery of Jesus' tomb is not restricted to its location, structure, or artifacts found. Its true value lies in the message it carries, which transcends the limits of archaeology. History does not end there, nor does it belong to the past. It pulses, crossing eras, cultures, transforming hearts and shaping beliefs in different corners of the world. This enduring force is anchored in 2 central foundations: faith and salvation. They underpin the entire Christian understanding of Jesus' mission and the meaning of his presence among men. But understanding the impact of these ideas requires more than study. It is necessary to live them. Faith, as taught in Christian teachings, is not just a passing emotion or a subjective feeling. It is an act of total surrender, a decision to trust fully in something that goes beyond the senses. It is not a blind bet, but a conviction that is nourished by inner experiences, spiritual experiences, and an intimate connection with the sacred. Millions of people, even without having witnessed the events reported in the Gospels, believe in them with total intensity. For these people, the empty tomb is not just a physical absence, but the confirmation of an eternal presence. This trust in the invisible is exalted in the scriptures, which state that believing without seeing is one of the purest expressions of connection with the divine. The episode of the resurrection, absent of incontrovertible material records, becomes, for this very reason, the greatest invitation to faith. The fact that there is no body in that tomb does not raise doubts among the faithful. On the contrary, it strengthens the certainty that death has been conquered, and if faith points to the invisible, salvation represents what is most concrete on the Christian spiritual plane. For believers, Jesus' death was more than an act of violence. It was a gesture of unconditional love. It wasn't a consequence of chance or an imposition of the Roman political system. It was a choice, a deliberate surrender to redeem the errors of all humanity. By taking on suffering, Jesus sealed a new covenant where sacrificial rituals would no longer be responsible for reconciliation with God, but faith in his supreme gesture. The stone that was removed from the entrance to the tomb symbolizes just that, the opening of a new path where death no longer has the final word. The resurrection marked the beginning of a new reality where hope replaces fear and grace overcomes the weight of guilt. This victory continues to be celebrated every year, especially at Easter, not as a symbolic event, but as a living testimony that something extraordinary has happened and continues to happen in the lives of those who believe. For those who live this faith, salvation is not something distant or abstract. It is part of the routine, present in daily decisions, in attitudes, in the way of seeing the world and relating to others. The empty tomb is not just an archaeological remains. It is a mirror of each believer's journey, reminding us that it is always possible to start again, to renew, to let go of what weighs us down and move on lightly. However, trusting in what you can't see is no easy task. Faith requires strength. It goes hand in hand with the unknown, with life's uncertainties, and often with God's silence. In the face of loss, pain, and frustration, it's natural for doubts to arise. And even Jesus' first followers were not immune to this. One of them, known for his hesitation, refused to accept the resurrection without visible proof. He wanted to touch it, to see it with his own eyes. And when he had this opportunity, he understood that faith begins where the need to see ends. This experience is not exclusive to the disciples of old. It is repeated in every person who at some point in their life is faced with the challenge of believing despite the lack of answers. And this is where faith and salvation come together inseparably. To believe that Jesus conquered death is also to accept that this victory extends to all those who choose to trust. This trust moves crowds, crosses cultures, connects generations. It's not something that can be imposed, bought, or proven in a laboratory. It is a personal response to the silent call emanating from that empty tomb, which to this day continues to speak to those willing to listen. Faith, for those who believe, goes far beyond a comfortable idea that comforts in difficult times. It is seen as a force that transforms, shapes, and redefines the meanings of existence. For Christians, it is this kind of faith that gives new meaning even to death. A clear example of this is the perception of the tomb, where, according to the Gospels, Jesus was buried. A place that once evoked pain and closure has come to be remembered as the point where hope was restored. From a scene of farewell, it became a symbol of a new beginning. For many, this tomb is not just part of an ancient story. It remains a powerful reminder that faith has the ability to illuminate even the darkest paths. Instead of fear, it inspires courage. Instead of despair, it suggests a fresh start. It is this understanding that strengthens the conviction that no obstacle is too great when you trust in something greater than yourself. Jesus' victory over death is therefore seen as a foretaste of what the faithful also hope to achieve, overcoming the transitory towards the eternal. The recent discovery of Jesus' tomb in Jerusalem has brought this feeling to the fore even more intensely. Although the historical value of the discovery is immense, the spiritual impact generated by it is much greater. The site, which had already been revered for centuries, has gained new relevance in the face of evidence and worldwide attention. By touching history, many felt that they were somehow also touching eternity. The city of Jerusalem, long recognized for its symbolic and religious significance, has witnessed countless remarkable episodes. But few compare in repercussion to what happened in the days surrounding Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. The records of the time show an unstable scenario in which Rome ruled strongly and internal tensions between different religious groups increased. Within this turbulent context, Jesus was tried, condemned, and executed. The method used, crucifixion, was reserved for those who posed a direct threat to established power. The Gospels not only document this process, but also link it to ancient promises made in Jewish scripture. Prophecies from the book of Isaiah, for example, describe the figure of a servant who would be rejected, punished, and who would bear the pain of many. Christians see in this portrait a clear preview of the mission fulfilled by Jesus. This connection between ancient texts and the events narrated in the New Testament forms the backbone of Christian belief. Over the centuries, researchers have found support for many elements described in the Bible. Cultural practices, places mentioned, names of rulers and customs of the time have been confirmed by archaeological studies, which strengthens the idea that faith and history are not mutually exclusive, but are in dialogue. The tomb in question is therefore not only important for its religious value, but also for enabling this link between the spiritual past and scientific research. And even with this material support, the heart of the matter remains beyond measure. The resurrection remains a mystery that cannot be explained by formulas. It escapes traditional methods of validation and resists any attempt to reduce it to a simple historical fact. What moves the faithful is not incontrovertible proof, but the deep conviction that, in that place, something divine happened, something that changed the course of humanity. This is why, theologically speaking, the resurrection represents the central point of the entire plan of redemption. It was necessary, according to the sacred writings, for the Son of Man to experience death and return to life so that it would be possible to restore communion between the Creator and the creature. This restoration was not limited to the spiritual realm. It was reflected in the cultural, social, and even political changes that Christianity brought about over the following centuries. Since then, the message has spread around the world, crossing borders and shaping identities. For believers, the empty tomb remains the most obvious mark of this change. For historians, it represents the beginning of a religious phenomenon that continues to influence societies to this day. And for archaeologists, it is an object of study that still holds unanswered questions. This overlapping of meanings is what makes Jesus' tomb an inexhaustible subject. It carries with it both the weight of tradition and an openness to questioning. It is a point of intersection between the known and the inexplicable, between what is documented and what is felt in the depths of the soul. For many, that's enough. The absence of a body is not interpreted as a gap, but as confirmation of a promise that death is not the end. As new generations come to know this story, the tomb continues to speak. It provokes reflection, invites transformation, and instigates the search for a deeper meaning to life. It doesn't matter whether someone sees it as an archaeological fact or a spiritual symbol. Its power lies in the impact it has. Each person who comes into contact with this story is prompted to ask themselves, what does this mean for me? And this question does not require an immediate answer. It acts like a seed which can sprout later at another time. It is in this sense that the tomb is not just in the past. It lives on in the collective memory, in rituals, prayers, and personal decisions. It is a living presence in the hearts of believers and even among skeptics. It is an invitation to contemplation. The experience of faith for Christians is a constant experience. The resurrection is not limited to a date on the calendar or a theological reference. It is renewed every time someone decides to start again, to forgive, to believe again. In this sense, the empty tomb is a reminder that even in the midst of loss, there are possibilities for rebirth. Even in silence there are answers, and even in the darkness there is light. For all these reasons, Jesus' tomb remains a bridge between what was and what can be, and you who have come this far are also standing in front of this symbol. Whether you believe, doubt, reflect, or research, this is a starting point. And for many, it is also a point of arrival. If you believe in the importance of continuing to explore these topics in depth and truthfully, consider supporting our channel. With a donation of $100, you contribute directly so that we can continue to produce valuable content based on research, dedication, and respect. Your support is essential, and with it, we can go even further. The link is in the first comment. Thank you very much for joining us so far.